Hi, everybody. Let me know when you can see and, of course, indeed hear me. Hello. Have I gone live? Give me a wave. Is there anybody out there? Ah, good. Excellent. 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 I'm quiet. Am I? Loud and clear, says Caroline. That's good. Right. Okay. A bit different. I thought I'd start with some thanks. So, some people who contributed in May 26. Thank you, Josephine, Bilton, Noreen, Caroline, Penny, Cheryl. That's very good of you. I appreciate that. And also to Fran, Deb, Wendy, Ava, and Cheryl. Thank you too. And to Nathalie, Mitzi, Joseph, Alexandra, and Janie. My thanks as well. And where are we? Marlene, Kathleen, True, Susan, and Patty. And finally, but no means least, Diane, Elizabeth, Pat, Ronnie Lynn, and Deirdre. So hopefully that kind of worked, and it's just a nice way for me to say thank you. But you can see and hear me okay, as long as you can do that. So just give me a last kind of update, and if you talk, we can hear you, because I'm doing it on the laptop, which I don't like doing. I must admit, it's harder than doing it outside. Strangely, when you and your phone and the data, it's dead easy. You've done it 100 times, but the minute you try and do this, get it all right and ready, and all that, it's hard work. But we're not to moan. So what we're going to do, obviously, is do Knaresborough. So I'm going to pass you over to this guy over here. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Knaresborough. Recording this because we'll be encountering some signal problems today. But nevertheless, I'm going to bring you the very best of Knaresborough. We're doing it this way instead. So, let us, without further ado. So, this is St John's House. When it was completed around 1490, it would have been one of the grandest houses in Knaresborough. Historians have dated the oak used to 1488, the very year a child named Ursula Southall was born, a woman who would one day be known as the Witch of York. And it's a house with a secret. During restoration work, a folded sheet of parchment was found hidden deep inside one of the beams. A confession of sins, written in the early 1500s. A confession so shaming that its author couldn't bring himself to speak aloud in the confessional. So he sealed it away in the fabric of his own house, to be discovered only after he was long gone. But this was no ordinary man. This house belonged to the prebendary of Beech Hill, a senior churchman, wealthy, educated, respected, not the parish priest, not the guy preaching every Sunday, but somebody higher up the ladder, a landholder for the church, a decision maker, a kind of moral authority, and the kind of man whose word carried weight in the town. And the hidden confession was almost certainly his. Whatever he wrote, he couldn't bear to speak it, not even to the parish priest, and he wouldn't have had far to go. Church Lane has always been the approach to the town's spiritual heart. For nearly 1,000 years, the people of Knaresborough have come this way to baptisms, to weddings, funerals, confessions and reckonings, and the first record of a church here dates to 1114, when King Henry I granted the church at Knaresborough to the Augustinian canons of Nossal Priory. And back then it was dedicated to St Mary. The dedication to St John the Baptist came later, after the Reformation, which reshaped the map. St Mary, a bit too Catholic sounding. Yep. Now, for most of its life, St John's wasn't just the parish church. It was the one solid thing in a town that lived with danger on its doorstep. For centuries, this was a place of sanctuary. When the outside world turned violent, people ran towards this tower, towards the sound of the bells. The bells were the sound of safety. But then came the Scottish raids. In 1318, raiders swept down through the Vale of York with a speed no one here was prepared for. Knaresborough was burned. Families fled in the churchyard, clutching whatever they could carry. The church was damaged, the town around it, but it regrew. Peace slowly came back. The fields were reploughed, the houses were rebuilt, and St John's rose again. Patched, repaired, strengthened. The scars become part of the stone. And after centuries of weather kind of trying to do its worst, it still stands. And this was the place where the town's conscience lived, where reputations were made and unmade, where charity was given and judgment too, where the church decided who belonged, who needed guidance, who needed watching. And for most of its history, St John was a central authority. It offered care for those that couldn't work, but charity came with expectations, with judgment, with a sense of place. For many, it was a refuge. For others, a cage. And it's here we meet a boy who escaped the cage. A boy they assumed would spend his life under the care of the church, to be fed, housed and pitied. But he had other ideas. John Metcalfe was born here in this cottage beside the graveyard in 1717. Known to everyone as Jack, this lively boy was cut down by smallpox at the age of 6. He survived in an age when many didn't, but he lost his sight completely. He could have lived his whole life within the sight of the tower. He could have been cared for, pitied and forgotten. That was the story that was written for him. But instead he stepped out into the world, first with his fingers on the stone walls, learning every edge and corner of the town. Then with careful steps, feeling the ground, listening to the echoes of the streets. And within 3 years he could find his way anywhere in Knaresborough. He knew the town by touch, by sound, by instinct. There's a story from his childhood. A soldier fell into the River Nid, struck by cramp. Jack heard the splash, heard the panic, and ran straight in after him. Blind, waist deep, fighting the current. It took him 4 attempts, but he dragged the man out alive. That was Jack, even as a boy. As he grew older, he pushed further. At 15, he became the in-house fiddler at the Royal Oak, playing for dancers and travellers. And people said you could feel the rhythm through the floorboards. He became a guide for visitors, leading them through countryside he couldn't see, but knew better than anyone. And sometimes even had to hide his blindness to get a job, walking with confidence, answering questions before they were asked, pretending to glance at landmarks he could only hear. that was shot at the station. And he fell in love too. He eloped with Dolly Benson, the landlord's daughter. Her family disapproved. But Jack never cared much for other people's expectations. The two of them ran off together, and for a while he made his living however he could. Fiddling, guiding, trading, even gambling. He was a notorious card player. Not because he cheated, but because he remembered every voice, every hesitation, every tell. In 1745, he joined the Yorkshire Blues, a militia raised to fight Bonnie, Prince Charlie. He marched north. He fought at Falkirk. He survived the chaos. And he was present at Culloden, the battle that ended the Jacobite Rising. A blind man in the thick of it, in the danger, relying on sound, instinct, and sheer nerve. He later said he always knew where the danger was by the way that the air moved. And when he came back from the Jacobite campaign, he didn't return as a hero. He returned as a man who'd seen the world beyond Knaresborough and realised how much bigger it was than the town ever imagined for him. So when he took up the stagecoach route between York and Knaresborough, he wasn't just driving passengers. He was reading the land. Every jolt, every rut, every sudden lurch of the wheels told him something. And that's when he realised something extraordinary. The roads weren't just bad, they were fixable. By 1752, he was running a stagecoach between York and Knaresborough. And it was on these routes that he discovered something that would change his life and Britain's roads forever. The roads were terrible, rutted, flooded, impassable. And Jack Metcalfe, blind Jack Metcalfe, decided he could build better ones. After the Turnpike Act of 1752, he won a contract to build a 3-mile stretch of road. People laughed. A blind road builder? Impossible. But Jack understood the land by feel. He understood gradients by the pull on a horse's reins. He understood drainage by the sound of water underfoot. He could walk a route once and remember every rise and fall, every bend, every soft patch of ground. And he built it. Then another, and another. He built causeways across bogs that engineers said couldn't be crossed. He built roads that stayed dry where others washed away. He built bridges, culverts, embankments, all without sight. And by the end of his life, he designed and built 180 miles of roads across Yorkshire, Lancashire and Derbyshire, many of which, believe it or not, still survive. And when he was an old man, still restless, still walking, he set off to York to tell his story. I like to imagine him climbing the steep rise of Kirkgate as we've just done, knowing exactly what waited at the top. Jack knew every inch of Knaresborough, every doorway, every cobble, every voice. He would have known the 6 Poor Folk Almshouse long before he reached it. It wasn't just charity, it was the town's reminder of where people like him were supposed to end up. A place built by the wealthy, partly out of kindness, partly out of fear, partly to keep the poor visible and grateful. A bed, a ration of broth, a roof that kept out some of the rain, and in return, a lifetime of dependence. And in a town this size, Jack would have known the men inside, men struck down young as he had been, men blinded by accident or illness, men who ran out of strength or work or luck, the familiar figures that begged in the market. Jack could have so easily been one of them. The town expected it, but he refused the script. And so as he strode on towards York to tell his stories, and the stories that he could tell, a life that broke every expectation this town ever had for him. A life of hunting, card playing, cockfighting, bridge building, and all the other undertakings that only Jack Metcalfe could get himself into. Jack Metcalfe was a man who refused the path that life had chosen for him. And in the end, when he set off from Spofford in his old age to tell his story, he walked the long road he had actually built. A man who didn't just take his own path, a man who made it. A man who left a line across the landscape so solid that 3 centuries later, it still bears his name. And when he died, he left behind 4 daughters, 20 grandchildren and 90 great and great-great-grandchildren. A man whose life began in darkness and in the end shaped the landscape of the north. And he sits here looking at a pub that's named after him. next to the one he was chased out of, laughing. The town that once tried to contain him now can't tell its story without him. The blind boy who stepped out of the churchyard and kept walking uphill. But next to him, of course, is the other famous outsider of Knaresborough, the one born the very same year the trees were cut to build a fine home for a senior churchman. But like Jack, she would never be embraced by the church. She'd be feared by it, despised by it, condemned as a witch by the most powerful churchman in the land, a man who wanted her burned at the stake. We'll hear her story later in the tour. For now, just take a moment with her, and with the fantastic creatures and the familiars that gather at her feet. They're playful, they're strange, mischievous, and they tell you everything about how the town chose to remember her. The town that she made famous. We just have a quick drink and kick on. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Thank you, lovely. Absolutely, yeah. Blind Jack, absolute hero. Yeah, do not be pigeonholed in life. Looks like him, didn't it? So Knaresborough's always had a kind of touch of otherworldly about it, as if a lot of mothership and strangers rubbed off on the place. This is a town where you genuinely have to watch out for runaway beds. Each June, 96 teams of 6 runners and 1 passenger race through a 2.5-mile course around the town, pushing, pulling, and sometimes swimming their beds to the streets and the river. It's been held there every year since 1966, and this year it's happening today as I broadcast this. And when I was signal testing here last year, as I walked down here and they got run over by a team practicing just on this stretch. So the course starts at the castle and finishes with a short swim across River Nid. Madness, glorious madness. But it raises about £100,000 for charity every year. A town that never kind of quite behaves like anywhere else, and that's the thing about Knaresborough. Its strangeness isn't an event, it's a climate. You feel it in the twisting lanes, the sudden drops, the staircases that appear out of nowhere. You feel it in the way the town clings to its cliffs, as if gravity works differently here.
I know, sir.
You feel it in the stories people tell, half remembered, half believed, about prophets, hermits, river spirits, and things glimpsed in the corner of an eye. It's a place where the improbable is simply part of the scenery, where the everyday has a habit of tipping into fantastical without anybody noticing. And it's also a place where naming a yard Green Dragon Yard can pass without comment. Knaresborough never blinks at a touch of the fantastical. At first glance, it's a chocolate box scene. Neat cottages, hanging baskets, a postcard of Yorkshire charm. But look a little closer and you start to see the real backbone of the community. This is a flax mill, built in 1808, and flax, also known as linseed, is a remarkable plant. Its seeds are pressed for oil and food, and its fibrous stalks are spun into linen. And the linen was the industry that made Knaresborough boom. With its constant supply of fresh water, the riverside became the hive of textile mills, the sound of looms and water wheels filling the valley. And the town's prosperity was woven from the river itself. Isn't it a wonderful name, Ronnie? Green Dragon, yeah. And it was the prosperity, the mills, the linen, the river, that created this town of surprises. Knaresborough is full of them. A warren of medieval streets and stone staircases twisting up and down the hillside. The town centre perched on cliffs above the Nid. The great railway viaduct sweeping across the gorge like something out of a painting. But before any of that, there was a rock. Knaresborough appears in the Domesday Book as Knaresborough. In Anglo-Saxon terms, it was known as Knaresborough, a fortress on a rock. And that's literally what it was. The first castle was thrown up by a Norman baron around 1100, right here on the kind of cliff above the river. And we even have documentary evidence from 1130 showing Henry I ordering works to be carried out on the castle, a reminder that this place mattered, even then. And it would soon become the refuge of 4 of the most notorious men in English history: Hugh de Morville, Reginald Fitzurse, William de Tracy, and Richard le Bret, the knights who murdered Thomas Becket in Canterbury in 1170. Or Thomas a Becket, you might have heard his name. It was a brutal killing. The Archbishop was struck down at the altar during a period of fierce conflict with Henry II, and it happened after the King's coronation had been held in York rather than Canterbury. The knights believed they were acting on the King's wishes, whether Henry meant it or not. And after the murder, they fled north, barricading themselves inside of Knaresborough Castle, living here for almost a year. Why here? Because the north was no friend of Becket. The Archbishop of York was his rival, and anti-Becket feeling ran strong. Their time here seeped into local tradition. It was said that guilt and divine justice followed them through these halls. Animals shrank away from them. Dogs refused the crumbs that even fell from their table. And the town remembered them not as bold knights, but as haunted men trapped in a fortress on a rock, waiting for judgment. After the Becket Knights, the castle story doesn't calm down. If anything, it becomes even more entangled with the great and the dangerous. It was briefly owned by the Archbishop of Canterbury in the early 13th century, before passing into the hands of King John. Now, King John saw this as a place as an important northern stronghold. He poured £1,300 into improvements, which is an enormous sum in those days, and it became one of his favourite castles. He stayed here often, enjoying the hunting in Knaresborough Forest. Edward I expanded the castle even further in the early 14th century, and the great keep that's just coming into view now was completed by his son Edward II in 1312. Now, Edward gave this castle to his notorious companion, Piers Gaveston, and then frequently visited the castle. Now, Gaveston's relationship with Edward has been debated for centuries. Some have suggested that it was romantic, homosexual obviously. Others argue it was resentment over his influence and rapid rise that sealed his fate. And this shouldn't be kind of underestimated, insofar as that Gaveston hadn't come from, a high-born family. So as he gets elevated quickly and given kind of titles and preferment, it's almost always at the expense of somebody else who felt should have been them that kind of got it. So you see how this kind of tension arises when newcomers come in. But whatever the truth, it was the resentment more than his sexuality that led to the murder of Piers Gaveston in 1312. And Edward himself had been murdered 15 years later. And then the castle passed to Philippa of Hainault, who was the wife of Edward III, and in 1331 it once again became a royal residence. And her son was the infamous John of Gaunt. He inherited it in 1372, and from that moment onwards, Knaresborough Castle became part of the Duchy of Lancaster, where it remains to this day. It is a beautiful ruin, isn't it, Carol? I agree. The duchy wasn't just a landlord. It's a kind of machinery of royal authority, and one of its important functions was the dispensing of the royal justice. The duchy's manorial courts dealt with everything from petty land to land disputes, while more serious matters were escalated to the duchy's higher courts, which acted in the name of the monarch as the Duke of Lancaster. And for people living across the honour of Knaresborough, this is where the King's law was felt most directly. Not in Westminster, but here through the duchy officers, juries. The justice was local, visible, and often very public. And the Lancastrian connection is still very much alive. King Charles III, our king, visited Knaresborough Castle recently, walking these grounds as the current Duke of Lancaster, meeting local groups, acknowledging the long, unbroken thread that ties the ruined fortress to the living monarchy. So that's nice. You're looking at the courthouse. This is the best preserved part of the castle. And the oldest part dates from the late 12th century, and the great arched doorway, just kind of a third of the way along there, was added in the 14th century. The law courts operated inside this building for centuries. So it wasn't just a courtroom, it's the administrative heart of medieval power structure. Justice here could be rough, local, and very public. Juries were drawn from the town, fines were paid on the spot. Offenders were sometimes held in the castle's criminal cells before being marched out for punishment. And the honour of Knaresborough was vast, stretched across dozens of villages. People travelled miles to have disputes settled under this very roof. Everything from land boundaries, livestock theft, market fraud passed through this doorway. And for centuries, the decisions made in this room shaped daily life across the district. Now, during the English Civil War, the castle was held for the Royalists, but after the fall of York in 1644, parliamentary forces took Knaresborough as well, and Parliament ordered the castle to be destroyed, and much of the stone you see now in the town today, houses, walls, even garden steps, was taken from these ruins. And then, after centuries of kings, queens, rebels and soldiers, the castle gained a very different set of residents. And they were gifted some ravens by the Tower of London, one of them a crow named Mordor. And in 2018, Mordor became briefly famous after being filmed greeting visitors in a Yorkshire accent, calling, "You all right, love?" So even the birds here have character. Now, obviously we're going to take in the famous view in a minute, but just before we do, let's pause and take a look here at the moment of the War Memorial, which I think is beautiful. It was unveiled in 1921. Typical stone cross, but unusually, the names are cast on brass plates. And one of the names that we're looking for is Percy Fryer, Fryer. Scan down here in our pistol. Isn't it beautiful? Look out the polish there. So there he is in the middle. So Private Percy Fryer was born here in Knaresborough. And as soon as he was old enough, he answered the call and signed up in Harrogate. He served with the 4th Battalion of the Yorkshire Regiment. The Leeds Mercury reported that on the 26th of May 1917, Percy was wounded in the chest, a bullet taken in action. He was sent to hospital, recovered, and then returned to what was left of his company. He was killed in action less than a year later, on the 12th of April 1918. He died at Esther on the River Lee near Neuve Chapelle, defending the village against the final German offensive of the war. He was 21. He never returned to Knaresborough. He never again saw this amazing, magnificent view. The swoop across the Nid Gorge, the arches of the railway viaduct, the river curling through the trees. It's one of the most famous views of Yorkshire. People come from all over the world to stand right here. And the moment they see it, they understand why. From up here, you can see exactly why the castle was built on this spot. A sheer drop to the river. A gorge that funnels sound and movement. And a vantage point that lets you watch every approach for miles. A fortress on a rock. Just as the old name Knaresborough tells us that it was. But it's more than history. This is a view that simply is Yorkshire. A mix of wild landscape and human grit. Stone arches built with absolute confidence. A river that refuses to run straight. A town clinging to the cliffs because that's where the story began, here at the castle. It's the kind of view that makes you feel the age of a place. The layers of it, from medieval kings to mill workers, to the people who live here now. A view that holds beauty and stubbornness in the same breath. And Percy Fryer never saw it again. But we do. And we carry it with us as we head down into the town that he once called his home. Let's have a drink. Treasure, it certainly is. So, the arrival of the railways in 1851 brought a new kind of life to Knaresborough. Visitors began pouring in. Day trippers, spa goers, families escaping the heat of Harrogate, just 4 miles away. Harrogate at that time was booming. Grand hotels, glittering assembly rooms, promenades full of wealthy visitors taking the waters and looking for something, anything, to fill long afternoons between treatments. Their doctors encouraged gentle exercise to improve the constitution, and Knaresborough offered exactly the right sort of outing. Picturesque, bracing, and just challenging enough to feel virtuous. So they came by train to Knaresborough, then made the steady descent from the castle down to the river. Parasols up, boots dusted, admiring the cliffs and the gorge as if they were stepping into a landscape painting. And as you'll see when we reach the bottom, see the train going across the viaduct there, top. The waterside has a distinct feel of a seaside promenade, despite the small detail that Knaresborough is more than 60 miles from the sea. And the town responded quickly. Tea rooms appeared along the waterside. Boat hire became fashionable. And artists set up their easels to capture the views the visitors adored. You can see the whole thing sort of framed. Did the train just arrive just in time? Didn't I order that? It's good, wasn't it? So Knaresborough kind of became a kind of annex to Harrogate's spa culture, a place where the wealthy could take the air, they could stretch their legs, and enjoy a dose of scenery before returning to the comfort of their hotels. The railways didn't just bring people, it brought a whole new rhythm of life to the town. But underneath it all, what gives it that feeling is the River Nid, which is far older than the town, of course, older than the castle, older than anything that humans have built here. It's what remains of an Ice Age glacier that carved this gorge, slicing a channel 120 feet deep through the landscape before winding its way during the River Ouse at Monkton near York. And as we descend and look at these cliffs on either side of us, these striking rock formations are known as crags. Geologically, this place is a bit of a show-off. There's a clear unconformity, a visible break in time between the mid-Carboniferous sandstones at the road level and the late Permian grits and limestones above. In other words, you're looking at millions of years of Earth's history stacked in a single cliff face. And it's one of the reasons Knaresborough feels the way it does, a town perched between deep time and human time, between ancient rock and Victorian industry, between river that carved the gorge and the people that built their lives along its edge, at the bottom of this hill, which is one of the most atmospheric places in Yorkshire. The Nid is said to come from the Celtic root, meaning hidden or covered, a clue to the river's strange behaviour further up the valley, where it disappears underground and re-emerges as if nothing had happened. A vanishing river in a town of surprises. Now, people have lived along this stretch of water for at least 4,000 years. Long before the castle, before the mills, before the railway brought visitors, this was a place that people fished, gathered water, and settled on the fertile ground beside the gorge. A whole chain of mills once lined this waterside. Across the river stood Castle Mills, whose huge water wheel pumped water up to the town and powered a paper mill. A cotton mill opened here in 1791, and flax spinning mills followed soon after, feeding the linen trade that had made Knaresborough prosper. All of it, every mill, workshop, industry existing as the river, a river carved by an Ice Age glacier that shaped the gorge, the town, and the lives of the people that lived here. Today, of course, the focus is leisure, boats, paddle boats, feeding ducks, etc. But until recently, it was a working river. It provided fish, fresh water, and thanks to its fast flow, a convenient sewage disposal system for the town. But the Nid has always done the heavy lifting, and when we look at these buildings here, these beautiful waterside buildings, mostly they began life as industrial mill buildings, part of the textile trade that once powered Knaresborough. Walton Company, working out of Castle Mills across the river, was the most successful linen manufacturer in the country and was awarded Queen Victoria, them the supply to the royal households. Still trade today. But the arrival of the railways changed everything, because this was a town, if you like, that had been water powered. Water was its kind of resource, clean water, fast water, water for dyeing. You're about to see a dyeing house in a minute. But cheaper coal, thank you, Cheryl, meant steam power. And once steam arrived, the watermills along the Nid were no longer the beating heart of industry. And slowly the textile activity here began to fade. So the trains brought people, they brought the kind of the new vibrancy and the kind of new leisure, but they also took away from. That makes sense? So you've kind of got two things playing out in simultaneity and synchronicity. So the trains bring industry, in terms of tourism, and they bring wealth and they bring people that want to come and spend time. But at the same time, they take demand away from the town because everything is now steam powered. So water powering is old hat. It's not as productive. You can't do it at scale. So consequently, it's a real double-edged sword. But anyway, the viaduct, town's most famous landmark, 78 feet high. Each span of the arch is 57 feet. First carried trains in 1851. You can't imagine Knaresborough without it. But actually, this is the second viaduct stand on the spot. The first was completed 3 years earlier in 1848. On the morning of Saturday 11th of March, just while the first train was due to cross its official opening, the entire structure suddenly began to fail. Eyewitnesses said it took a full 5 minutes to collapse. 5 minutes of groaning stone and twisting timber before the whole thing crashed into the gorge below. The debris forced the river to rise more than 12 feet, and every fish in the Nid died from the lime leaching out of the mortar. The collapse was blamed on poor workmanship, but it didn't come as a surprise to everyone, because centuries earlier, a woman born in a cave just up the river, a woman Henry VIII himself called the Witch of York, had already foretold it. And that woman was Ursula Southall, Mother Shipton. And now, as we follow the river, we're heading towards the place where her story begins. So Ursula Southall would one day become infamous as Old Mother Shipton. She was born in 1488 into an affluent, respectable and deeply conservative town of Knaresborough. This was a place where people valued order, reputation and propriety. A place where everyone knew everyone else's business and judged them for it. Ursula's mother, Agatha, was not married. She was not known to be courting, and when news of her pregnancy spread, the town reacted with outrage. Agatha was hauled before the magistrates, and they demanded her to name the father. She refused, and no man confessed, or rather, no man confessed publicly. People whispered that no man would claim the child, and perhaps that no man could. For a defiance, Agatha was banished. Mother and daughter were forced out of the town and into the woods to live in a cave on a far bank of the river. They survived as best they could, drinking water from their own well. And because they didn't come to the communal well, because they didn't stand in line with other women, exchanging gossip and glances, they were outsiders from the very beginning. When Ursula was 2 years old, Agatha gave her up for adoption, and the child moved into a house with a new family. But the strangeness followed her. One day her foster mother left her alone to run errands, and when she returned, the front door was wide open. Afraid of what might still be inside, she called for her neighbours, and together they heard a sound like 1,000 cats in consort, a wailing that rose and fell through the house. Ursula's cradle was empty. They searched every corner until someone looked up, and there she was, naked and cackling, perched on an iron bar above the fireplace where the pot hooks hung, and no one could explain how a toddler had climbed up there. No one tried. Ursula grew, and so the unease around her grew. She was said to be disfigured, a hooked nose, a crooked back, and the cruelty of the townspeople was relentless. But the legends say she could fight back, even as a child. One afternoon, the chief men of the parish were gathered in a house for a meeting. Ursula walked past on an errand, and the men jeered at her. Hag-face, devil's bastard! She didn't stop. She didn't even look at them. But when they sat back down, the ruff round one man's neck twisted and snapped into the shape of a toilet seat, clamping tight. The man beside him burst out laughing until his hat dissolved into a chamber pot. The room roared with laughter, and the master of the house came running. When he tried to step through the doorway, he found himself blocked by a pair of horns that had sprouted from his own head. Moments later, everything returned to normal. No horns, no chamber pots, no toilet seats. But the message was clear. Mock her at your peril. As Ursula grew older, her knowledge of herbs and plants became invaluable. People came to her quietly, ashamed to be seen, but grateful for her cures. Respect or fear, softened the edges around their cruelty. And it was then she met Toby Shipton, a local carpenter. And against all expectation, they married. People whispered that he must have been bewitched, but by all accounts they were happy. A month into the marriage, a neighbour came to Ursula in distress. A thief had stolen her new smock and petticoat. Ursula soothed her and said she'd retrieve them the very next day. And at the market cross, the thief appeared. Unable to stop herself, she marched through the town wearing the stolen smock over her clothes, a petticoat in her hand, singing at the top of her lungs, "I stole my neighbour's smock and coat. I am a thief, and I'm here to show it." And she danced straight to Mother Shipton, curtsied, handed over the clothes, and walked away in silence. And no one ever stole again. 2 years later, Toby Shipton died suddenly. The town blamed Ursula, of course. Grief and suspicion drove her back into the woods, back to the cave where she'd been born. There she lived alone, making potions and remedies for those brave enough to seek her out. Her name had spread far beyond Knaresborough. People travelled miles to consult her, and then she began to prophesy. At first small things, a birth, a death, a failed harvest. But as her predictions came true, she grew bolder. She spoke of kings and of kingdoms, of the fall of great men. In 1537, Henry VIII wrote to the Duke of Norfolk mentioning a witch of York, and he almost certainly meant her. She clashed with Cardinal Wolsey, who threatened to have her burned. She replied, so the story goes, that he would never set foot in York. And indeed, Cardinal Wolsey died on the way to York. Her prophecies grew darker. She foresaw the break with Rome, the fall of Wolsey, the short life of Edward VI, the bloody reign of Mary, and the long rule of Queen Elizabeth. She is said to have predicted the Great Plague of 1665, the Great Fire of London the following year. And like Nostradamus, she wrote in rhyme and riddle. By dressing it up in mystical languages, you could avoid the kind of lines that would point towards witchcraft. Okay, so a very fine line that these people were treading. In 1559, she published her great poem of prophecies, a work that would echo through the centuries. Now, Mother Shipton died in 1561 in Clifton, New York. And it was only after her death that the authorities dared to investigate the cave where she lived. And there they discovered the truth, or something like the truth. The well's waters were so heavy with minerals that anything left behind them for weeks or months became coated as if stone. So you can see why this idea of turning people to stone, turning objects to stone, was a very kind of real and rational fear of the people. They'd seen it for themselves. They weren't imagining it. Thank you, Elizabeth. That's great. I love that. So, a shoe, a hat, a doll, a rope, all slowly transformed as if the water was remembering them in rock. To the people of the 1500s, that was, it's pretty out there. That is pretty full on. You've got to say, you can understand how people would be convinced. And perhaps it still is enough. There's something obviously about Ursula, but also about the outsiders. And I think still to this day, we look at Knaresborough and it is so sort of beautiful and pretty and chocolate box and kind of insidery, as you might say. It is the perfect evocation of what kind of Yorkshire is and Old England is. And, there's other places around the country, but, it's probably one of those places you go, oh, God, if I go to England, I want to come here, because it's just evokes everything I think about England. But that shot through and so sitting underneath that is that strange, mystical Old England that you can't quite put your finger on, that the polite society tries to kind of smooth out, that it tries to sort of push these figures to the edge of the picture, that it tries to make the narrative about the predictable and the kind of the royal and the constrained and all that kind of stuff. But there's something about it. Here's Ursula's cave for the picture. See all the petrified items hanging up. So you hang them on there and basically just turns down. There's something about Knaresborough, though, that remembers its outsiders better than its conformists. You know, we've got Mother Shipton at one end and Blind Jack at the other. Both kind of pushed aside by the town's respectability. Both of them refusing to sort of stay put. Both ending up, in the end, larger than the town tried to contain them. So that's my story this time round about Harrogate. I've told different stories in different kind of ways. I hope you've enjoyed this slightly kind of remixed sort of take on things. Born out of frustration, of course, because I arrived there last week ready to rock and roll and found out that the internet had been switched off in Knaresborough. And so, in a huff and a puff and an annoyance, I kind of walked round. And I thought I'd shot enough, but I only shot about 45 minutes, so we're not quite the full hour. But I do hope that you've enjoyed that. And that's why you love the time. Yeah, Sandy, I think there's a lot to see in it. And I think the very fact that now in the town square you haven't got this airbrushed idea of history. You know, you've got the man that refused to say, there's Ursula. You know, this is, by the way, it's carved in stone in her caves. It's awesome. I love it. I'll leave that for a little bit. You know, when you go into the centre, you know, you're not looking at kings and queens. You're looking at a blind guy that just transcended every expectation people had of him, that refused to be a beggar and refused to hold his hand out, and literally fought his way by feeling his way first, you know, and he didn't just like create new paths; he built new roads, quite forging a path. And this is in the early part of the 18th century, you know. And then Ursula, obviously 200 years before, but kind of being told, you know, you don't belong, you're an outsider, and yet in the end becoming in demand because these wise women, these women that understood kind of knowledge and herbs and the world around them, you know, were vital in a kind of world without doctors. So I think it's brilliant that those two are now in the marketplace, that when you walk into Knaresborough, it's not, isn't it lovely and posh, but rather look at how two of nature's oddballs, outsiders, strange people would normally call from, people whose stories were never part of history, now sit with you on a bench. Each one of them sit on a bench in Market Square, and it's kind of difficult to film actually because people always sat next to them, which is kind of nice. But how great to be like you're sitting in a place that looks like it is super kind of conservative and super cute, and here it is now celebrating the ultimate outsiders. I think that's really kind of nice. And talking about outsiders, just before I kind of go, I just get a look strict straw poll. Let's flip me kind of back on. Yesterday, the awful news came through that we lost one of our great Yorkshiremen, David Hockney, who many of you will kind of be familiar with. His kind of famous sort of California paintings, the fact that he kind of really kind of captured the glamorous life. But also towards the end of his life, for that last 20 years of his life, he really focused on Yorkshire. And there is an astonishing collection. Many of them in Salts Mill in Saltaire, where we were a few weeks ago, if you recall. And I'd kind of like, with your permission, to do a kind of tour about that. And I'm asking your permission because I don't normally do things like about art. But I think he's so interesting in his way of seeing Yorkshire and colour and beauty where other people would simply see a farm track. It's kind of interesting, and I think it would be worthwhile. I'm not saying I would do it necessarily next week, but if you think that would be something that would be of interest, then I will definitely kind of look to sort of build that in, because to me he's a really kind of important kind of Yorkshire guy, again, outsider, rebel, you know, openly gay at a time when that was, you know, you meant to keep about it quiet. He was like, no, I'm gay, deal with it, you know, refused, smoked all his life until 88, and said, well, you know, if you're 88 and smoke, then so what, you know. So he carved his own kind of furrow. Do you know what I mean? He created new ways of seeing. He kind of attended art school in the 60s with a thick Yorkshire accent, and they made fun of him, and his view was, you know, if I paint like you did, I keep my mouth shut, pal. He went on to conquer the world. So I think that there's a story to tell there and explore Yorkshire. But as I say, I just wanted to kind of get a bit of feedback from you first, because it's not going to be the Californian pools and this, that, and the other. It is going to be his visions of Yorkshire, because I think that's my territory, and I'll leave that to others to talk about his kind of California and his sort of celebrity stuff. But he did use his iPad in later years. That's right. He became an accomplished digital painter. So he wasn't even scared of technology in the end. So if that's okay, then that will be fab. So, great friend of our king, yeah, he's an absolute geezer. So, at the top, we did the thank you. So apologies if you missed that. I'll quickly bob those back up so that you can see those. So this is just a quick thank you to the people. Your thing, you get 8 minutes on me, unless any particular questions that you want me to answer. So yeah, same time next week. So yeah, we're still live, and there you go. So I do hope that has I realise what's happened now. So hopefully the sound is back. So can you hear me now? Hope you can hear me now. But yeah, you should be able to hear me now. So yeah, thank you everybody, and it's been an absolute hoot and delight. And yeah, thank you. Yes, I forgot that would happen. I should have linked up. It's because I wasn't planning to do it like this, and then it was it was all set up on my phone to do, and then of course I didn't get to do it on my phone last week, so they've been just sat there kind of waiting. So you can hear me. That's great. So yeah, that's it. So good. Short, a little bit short of the hour today, but nonetheless, hopefully you feel like you've had. Yeah, so basically, I was just saying thanks and just saying, that it was, really, really valued. So that's it. That's your time for this week, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. But of course, and this is where any of you that aren't aware, we also have a communal watch party, and I did. So Kit Morey, we will be together tomorrow night as well, and we'll be in Boston Spa. But tomorrow night's a little bit different. It's a communal watch party. And what that means is it's live at 5 from a few weeks ago. I'll be in the chat. I'll be getting a little bit behind the fourth wall. I'll be joining in some of the fun, answering some of your questions, but also I'll tell you about some of the things that were happening as it was happening, as you might say, because it's very kind of, you get to edit a lot with live tours. So you don't always see what's going on. You only see what's on the camera at the time, but at times I'll tell you what's happening elsewhere. So I do hope you enjoyed that, and yeah, warm welcome. Absolutely, join the family. You're most welcome. So there we go. Thank you everybody who's made a contribution, and I look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. So from York, next week we'll be out and about again. Can't wait for it. It's fun doing it at home, but I do like the live and on the street is where I want to be. So with that,